Hey guys, it's Sign here, the Hobbies Man once again, and today we're doing another episode of the Sword and Sorcery Book Club. Today I'm decked out in my Robert E. Howard days shirt here with Conan climbing out of, or coming out of Robert E. Howard's house. Very cool. And today we're looking at the first, episode in the reading challenge, The Road to Scourge of the Serpent. And today we're looking at the story, The Valley of the Worm. Now, this story was published in 1934 in Weird Tales. So this was before Robert E. Howard killed himself, ended his own life. And this story focuses in on James Allison. I guess this is like the James Allison story. And it's actually not about him, technically. It's about his genetic memories as this other character called Njord, right? So James Allison is a character that, for whatever reason, has access to genetic memories, right? Kind of something similar to the characters in Assassin's Creed, right? Like, instead of having to get an inanimate so that he can go and relive Ezio's life, James Allison just kind of dreams of the lives of his previous incarnations, or his ancestors, I guess is really what it is. It's his ancestors, not his previous versions of himself, right? Like, he doesn't reincarnate, he just remembers things from his past ancestors, right? Very cool. And this is kind of like the quintessential James Allison story. This is about a character called Njord, like I said already, who is an ancient Aesir. Now, the Aesir are like what would eventually become the Norse gods, right? And these characters are the most ancient version of like the white man that came from the north kind of concept, right? Because that was a thing that was popular back in the day, this idea of like separate development of human races. And there was like the idea that the I guess Scandinavians would be separate, and they would be like the original white men that come down, which is kind of like where the Hyperborean concept as well comes from, where the Aryans, the sons of Aries, would be a much later version of humanity that comes from the east into the west, and that's where we get Indo-European languages in today's archaeological kind of understanding, right? I don't think that Robert E. Howard was really working with that too clearly, but there was an understanding that at some point in the past, there was a group that eventually became known as Aryans, and they were from somewhere in the Middle East. Some of them went to India, became, the Indian people that we know today, and some of them went out west and became the Europeans that we know today, right? And this is before all of that, right? This is many, many, many centuries before. This is an ancient Aesir character who is joining his band of his family and some other people of this clan as they travel south, right? And as they travel further and further south, they actually end up in a jungle environment. Here they meet the Picts, who are the black-haired white people of the regions. And there is a little bit of discomfort here and there in some of the ways that the Picts are described, because Robert E. Howard kind of talks about the fact that they are white men, as clearly as Njord is a white man, but with their proximity to the jungle, they have taken on some of the attributes of the black man that would eventually show up, right? And he says it kind of very clearly like this, which is kind of interesting. As a fan of archaeology and alternate history type stuff, this is a concept that has been floated around a little bit. If you're not aware, the Olmec heads have very clearly been, understood to have been made by native Mesoamericans, people in the valley, of Mexico, down south in the Mexican jungles. And a lot of those Olmec heads look exactly like people that claim descendancy and live in the Yucatan would look like today. But the phenotype, or the way that their face is structured, does have that kind of like broad nose, like, kind of vibe that you see in African populations. And so for a long time in the past, there was this idea that black people made it to the America, somehow made these things, and then they just disappeared, I guess, or became assimilated with the Native Americans. And I guess that this is where this is coming from, this idea that the Picts are developing these traits, these phenotypes to deal with the jungles, because they are living there, right? And this kind of like African phenotype, or whatever you want to call it, is due to that, which is kind of funny because that's not where African people come from. Like, we understand the out of Africa theory is clearly out of plains in Africa, right? Not out of jungle. So whatever, it's fine. But it is a little bit uncomfortable in that sense. At the same time, it's pretty cool. Like the idea that he's probably looking at some of this stuff, some of the stuff that's coming from Mesoamerica. He sees a picture of an Olmec head, maybe, or he at least gets it described to him, and then he takes that idea and he uses the Pix to kind of play with it, right? Like, very cool stuff in general, right? And as they have this conflict with the Pix initially, two different races meeting for the first time, they go to battle, and then the Aesir are much better than them just because they're the coolest, baddest, blonde people ever. They develop a friendship with the Pix through the fact that Njord decides to not kill one of their young men after the battle. He decides to spare his life just because why not? This man is young and interesting and powerful and would like to fight with him again. And they become friends, Njord and this character called Gorm or Grom. And then the Pix and the Aesir become friends, right? And they live in the same region. They don't really intermingle or anything like that. They just stay separate but coexist. And eventually, the Aesir have this like wanderlust to them. And so half of them split up from the tribe that made it to the Pictish jungle. And they decide to move on further down. And they initially just move a little bit further away, down deeper into these wilds, into this valley that the Picts are afraid of. And we learned that they're afraid of this valley because when they originally made their way to this jungle region, they went down into the jungle, they went down into this valley, and they found this pit. Out of this pit came a ape-like being who played the flute, and when the flute was played long enough, this creepy, horrifying, white-skinned monster slug thing would come out of this pit, and it would just randomly start killing people and things. And so they just were really, really afraid of it. And they would actually kind of worship this creature as a god to an extent. It's supposed to be an older one or an elder one. And it's very cool, very interesting concept, right? This story is told to us by Grom later, where Njord retells it to us after he goes off to visit his friends that split off from the original tribe. He goes to their village, and what he finds is death and destruction and no living beings there anymore. Grom shows up a little bit later, and he's like, "Oh shit, dude! I saw the whole thing. I stayed away because I was afraid, because that's kind of the way that the Picts are portrayed here." And he explains to him what happened. They were attacked by the worm. They were destroyed. And so with fury in his heart, Njord goes into the jungle. Now, he doesn't initially go to the valley directly. He goes to the jungle to go hunt for Satha. Satha is the great serpent. In this story, it's told to us by James Allison that Satha is a great serpent that eventually is what becomes known as Set, right? As the Stygians become the dominant people in this region, and then the Egyptians adopt their god as one of theirs, right? Now, it's kind of unclear because, in the Hyperborean age, the gods are real. They exist as entities, right? But James Allison is like a modern man, right? Or as modern as you can be in the 1930s. And so he thinks of gods, and I assume gods that are not the, Yahweh Elohim, God of Abraham, as not real, right? As mythology, as fake, right? And so it's kind of, the way that it's written is like Satha is not really a god, but it is worshipped as one over time, and it becomes something else, right? But we know that they're real. So there was a little bit of a dissonance there for me, a little bit, but ultimately it's not that important. You can kind of understand that from James Allison's perspective, this is not a real god. It is just the beast that inspires the myth, right? Which is pretty cool. And Njord sets a trap for it using giant trees. He manages to force it to come to him, and the trees fall on it. And so he manages to butcher Satha, kill it, and harvest its venom, right? And then he takes all of his arrows and he dips them in this venom in order to create poison arrows. And then he goes back to the valley. He finds the pit. He does a war dance, a death song, and he relieves himself of all his weapons except the ones he's going to use for this hunt, right? The creature, the ape thing, comes out of the pit and it starts playing its flute. Njord kills it with one arrow, and yet the flutes don't stop playing. So this was very, very crazy, very weird, very scary. And then eventually the valley is taken over by the worm, right? The worm shows up and it's his valley, and he's like, what the fuck's going on? And the thing is that this is not just a worm, it's also a bit of a spiky ball, and it also has tentacles, and it's just nasty and creepy and ugly, and it's just a horrifying creature. And Njord stays away from it, and he riddles it with arrows, but none of the arrows are really doing any damage until eventually its skin turns blue, it runs off, and then falls into its valley again, or into its pit, and then Njord follows it down, and then he has a final confrontation with it, and I think it actually just dies from the poison, but it does kind of attack him a little bit for a while, and then Njord eventually manages to crawl out of the pit and is found by Grom, and I guess Grom is the one that spreads his legend, which becomes the origin for all of the great dragon, snake hunter people in mythology as we know them today, right? Beowulf and all of these other characters, right? And it's very cool. I really enjoyed this story a lot. There were some moments here and there where it was kind of a little bit, kind of concerning in the sense that, like, oh, if you follow this to the natural progression, the natural progression of some of these ideas of Robert E. Howard kind of falling for these ideas would mean that he was kind of like a shitty person, right? It is what it is. It's not really a thing that I care too much about, but it does make you a little bit uncomfortable in like the sense that this is very different from modern sensibilities, right? And it's not a big deal overall. It's not very important to the story, but it is present in some ways. And so some of you might find some annoyance with it. Some of you might be annoyed at me for mentioning it at all. And some of you won't care either way. And I think that that's really where we should all fall. It's just, okay, it is what it is. It happened. This is what was popular to believe in the 1930s. It's not accurate. We know that. And we got to roll with the punches, as it were, right? And so this story is great. I really liked it. I think it's like a 5 out of 5 for me. It was really enjoyable. I had already been familiar with the story because of the Serpent War comic book that I read last year. That's Jim Zub's crossover event when he was at Marvel, running the Conan story for that. And so I was aware of it, but this was the first time that I've read it properly, and I really enjoyed it. I think it is probably one of my favorite Robert E. Howard stories so far, right? So really good stuff. I recommend you guys read it. If you read it or you know about it, let me know down in the comments. If there's a good adaptation of this in the comic books, let me know down below. I'll see if I can track it down and read it, or maybe do a comparison video for it later or something like that. And of course, let me know what you think about the story. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys next time.